So many people report today that they're feeling like they're barely surviving. Somewhere between the workload they're feeling, the pressure that they're feeling from above, there is practically no time to think even 3 months ahead, let alone to figure out how do you get yourself out of that state and into a better state called thriving.
For the longest time in my life, I identify with my thoughts as if they were truths, as if they were the reality, facts. And the moment I started slowly detaching myself from my thoughts, my goodness, did I find a tremendous amount of agency and thriving. The way I define agency is our capacity to make intentional choices supported by the belief that those choices matter and have an impact in the world. As I got older, what I started realizing is, yes, behavior is incredibly important, but it's not the only element that matters. Thriving, it's not like a state that we achieve. It's more of a practice. So thriving is
There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing it all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. So many people report today that they're feeling like they're barely surviving. Somewhere between the workload they're feeling, the pressure that they're feeling from above, the need to push for more, the demands for the general chaos that's going on, and all the second and third and fourth times that you have to check on something and recheck on something and confirm again something. People are feeling, or at least they say to me, completely overloaded and, as I said, barely surviving. In that context, there is practically no time to think even 3 months ahead, let alone to figure out how do you get yourself out of that state and into a better state called thriving. So that may seem to you like a pipe dream, but I'm going to tell you it's actually manageable, and that's what we're going to talk about. So by thriving, we mean feeling connected, being creative, being calm, being able to think, be able to develop clever solutions, just to name a few. So how do you get to that state more often is what we're talking about today. My guest is John Rosemberg. The book we're talking about is A Guide to Thriving, the science behind breaking old patterns, reclaiming agency, and finding meaning. Sounds wonderful. Now, John knows this firsthand from his own growth, which is a story about immigration, loss, career reinvention, and it sort of inspired him to write this book and to help business leaders with some cutting-edge research do an absolutely better job. Deep belief in human potential. He founded a firm called Anther that's dedicating to transforming uncertainty into possibility. He's worked with a whole lot of high-profile clients like Walmart, Procter & Gamble, a bunch of others. And I should say he's originally from Venezuela and now makes Toronto home. John, welcome to the podcast.
Wanda, what a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. It's such a joy to be here.
It's a pleasure to be talking to you about this one. And I am super excited because one particular aspect of your work, I think, sets it apart from all the other work that I have seen and talked to people on this podcast about thriving. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk. What got you started on this journey to do the research and to write the book?
So, Wanda, I spent 2.5 decades in the corporate world trying to climb the corporate ladder. And I was, always kind of focusing on what was my next promotion, the next raise, how would I grow my team, how would I get more responsibility. After those 2.5 decades, I ended up working for a startup, really high growth startup here in Toronto called, anyway, let's not get into the name of the startup, but we ended up raising a Series B round of $115 million. So we were doing great. And by all of my measures, I had accomplished everything I wanted. I had a great title. We were fully funded. We were ready to go. And I ended up flying this was in December of 2020. I ended up flying to Los Angeles to buy some facilities to expand our business. And when I got back to Toronto, I found myself, number one, with COVID, and number two, completely burnt out. I was on a technical call with the team, and the call escalated quickly. I was deeply in survival mode in that moment, and I ended up just shutting off my laptop, just closing the lid, turning off my phone, And I heard my two kids, who at the time were 9 and 6, playing in the basement. So I went downstairs to the basement to play with my kids. And I saw them on the floor, building stuff with Legos. So I just sat on the floor with them, and I spent about an hour just sitting there with them. And the realization that came for me in that moment was that I was really missing a lot of their lives. And although I was physically present, they would see me at breakfast or at lunch, I wasn't actually present with them. So for the rest of the day, I kind of meditated on the moment that I was at. And that evening, I was sitting in my favorite chair, and Adriana, my partner, she walks into the room and she says, "John, are you okay?" She noticed something was going on. And I said to her, "I think I'm done." And over the next 2 weeks, I untangled myself from the company, started my own consulting firm, ended up going back to school and getting a master's in applied positive psychology that eventually led me to write this book. So that was kind of like a very specific moment in my story that I remember very vividly. And I must say, it wasn't just that moment. It wasn't just an epiphany, right? There were a lot of small signals building up to it and after it as well.
Go back. I want to know something about those signals, because I hear an awful lot of people say, "I'm worried that I'm going to burn out," or "I think I'm burning out." It's very common to use that language, burning out. But I often don't know that people understand what truly burnt out looks like. So what were your symptoms, your feelings at that moment when you say, "I think I'm done"?
Yeah, so let's maybe quickly define what survival mode is, because we've talked about it, and you talked about it in your introduction, Wanda. And I think survival mode can be really helpful for many of us. I grew up in Venezuela, and Venezuela at the time was a country in crisis. We had a lot of violence. The year I emigrated to Canada, by some estimates, there were 52,000 violent murders in the country, which, as you can imagine, it's like a civil war, right? So while I was living in Caracas, it was really useful to be in survival mode, because it protected me from going into certain places or, engaging with certain people. It allowed me to protect myself. Once I moved to North America, I realized that survival mode is not as useful most of the times, because most of the threats that we face are psychological, not physical. Our physical health, for some people it is, so let's not use it as a blanket statement, but for most of us, for many of us, especially those of us who are knowledge workers, who are in the corporate world, right? Survival mode is not really a state that we want to be living in all the time.
Okay, so keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. So with this in mind, I think some of the signs that we are in survival mode, the first thing that we need to do is create some awareness around it. So for some of us, that could come in the form of physical sensations. So it could be a tight jaw, or our shoulders get really tense, or our chest, or we feel pressure in our chest, or our breath gets shallow. But it could also show up in the form of overthinking and just having a lot of thoughts racing through our minds. Some people, pathologize it and call it anxiety when it gets to a certain extent. It could also be in terms of how we handle our emotions and how we engage emotionally with people around us. These are all little signs of us being in that state of survival mode.
Okay, so then for definition purposes, contrast that with thriving. What does thriving really look like on a day-to-day basis?
I love that question. And I like to start by saying what thriving is not, because I think we often try and use thriving as a synonym for success. And I think success is very well defined in our society. Success is money, power, status. Those three things, if you have them, you are successful. And that's how most of us define it. Thriving, on the other hand, well, number one, it's a practice. It's not like a state that we achieve. It's not like once I got the title or once I got enough money in the bank, then I'm thriving. It's more of a practice. So that's number one. Number two, I think thriving is composed by three very different elements, more intrinsically motivated elements. And I would say those are agency, meaning, and connection, human connection, social connection, our ability to be around our community. So that would be the difference between survival mode and thriving.
All right, so let me ask a question. I think that there's a mythology that we should be in thriving mode 100% of the time and barely ever in survival mode. Is that realistic, achievable, even a good goal?
I'm not sure it's realistic, especially in the world that we live in. Is it achievable? I don't know. Maybe there's somebody out there who's thriving all the time. I think life throws different things at us, and we cannot control what happens in our environment. What we can control, and I don't even know if the word control is the right word here, but what we can influence is how we navigate the things that occur to us. And listen, even after I left the startup and started my own business, and eventually I started building a nice portfolio of clients, and the business started growing. And that same year, my best friend was diagnosed with cancer, and 4 months later, he passed away. And a couple of months later, my wife was diagnosed with MS. So there's pain, and a lot of us go through these pain in life. This is just being alive, right? Like, we all go through it. And I think because we see all these filtered realities through social media or television or wherever it is that you consume information, we get to think that people's life actually look like that. But the reality is that we all go through hardship. I think thriving is figuring out a way to build resilience and to grow from that hardship. And if you think about it, that's a pretty good choice, because what's the alternative, right?
Yeah. Well, I can be defeated by it, or I can decide to do something else by it. And that's the hallmark of what I understand of the resilience work, the resilience research and literature, is that this awful thing happens to you, not necessarily by your own doing, but it happens. And then the question is, what are you going to do about that? Like, how are you going to deal with that event and to move to a new state? Because in many cases, there is no going back. There is only a going forward. And that's that sense of thriving. And I love what you said, that there are three elements. There's agency, meaning, and connection, social connection. And that also is consistent with whatever we've said. In a prior podcast, I'm going to just give this quote and a shout out to Corey Keyes. I'm sure you know him because he's also affiliated with the same program that you worked through. And Corey says that in every day, there are moments of languishing and moments of thriving. And that what you want to do is not have the balance of languishing be too long or too much. And there's some research that says we want about 2-to-1 thriving to languishing to be about the best. I don't know if that's an accurate statement or not, but I just think it's a nice recognition that every day is not perfect. Every day has a mix of good and not so good. And so do moments in life, years in life, have some good ones, hard ones, and some not so hard ones. Okay, the thing I like about your work more than anybody else, John, is this notion about agency. Okay, this is a concept that's been around for a long time. It's clearly present in anything I look at on resilience, human resilience, and it would say that agency is a really powerful first step. But very few people really go into depth and explain it. It's an old psychological term with a whole bunch of, mess behind it as well. So give me your definition of what you think agency is. Explain it to me. And then I want to take a little deeper dive into what that means.
Sure. Let's jump into agency. I just want to touch on something you said, Wanda, that I found really insightful. And it's this notion of resilience. And a lot of times we use resilience as bouncing back, right? So the general idea is that resilience is that we bounce back from hardship. I think thriving is bouncing forward from hardship. So it's actually using that as a stepping stone to continue moving, growing in our lives. So let's talk about agency. So the way I define agency is our capacity to make intentional choices. So the key word there being intentional, supported by the belief that those choices matter and have an impact in the world. And I think the second part of the definition often gets overlooked, but the belief that we have around how we make our choices, our intentional choices, is a really important part of agency. Now, this is my definition and the one that I use to operationalize it and to write the book. I think there are other definitions out there. This one works for me, and it seems to be strongly supported by the research. And I'm sure that some other folks in the future will come to us and say, hey, how about, this? And have you thought about that? So, but for now, the capacity to make intentional choices supported by the belief that those choices matter and have an impact on the world.
As often happens in psychology, in the more academic research, we start with a concept and then we start debating what that concept means. And we get one, camp in one direction, another camp in a slightly variation on a theme, and usually a third, fourth, or fifth camp that have their own variations. And then it becomes a muddled mess, and we can't figure out what we're actually talking about. In my read of the literature, agency has done that in the historical psychological past. It's still a really useful concept, and I like your simplicity because it's actionable. It's understandable for an average person. So the capacity to make a choice with the belief that our choices will make a difference. Now, I think one of the things that we think is that I need to make a choice that's going to put me dramatically in a new place. Instead of bouncing forward a little step, I'm thinking that I'm going to bounce forward and end the drama and everything will be great. And that just isn't realistic. Often it is a tiny step forward. Is that true in your experience?
Yes, absolutely. It's usually, epiphanies and great breakthroughs come once in a blue moon. But for most of us, the experience is just small changes that accumulate over time. Now, I want to look at agency as a spectrum. So as opposed to saying I have agency or I don't have agency, the first thing I think it's important to know that we can develop agency. It's a skill set. It's something that we can, like going to the gym, we can exercise the muscle of agency. That's number one. Number two is that we can see agency, if we see it on a spectrum, there's very low agency, which is when we say I don't have a choice. And there are times in life where we actually don't have a choice, especially when our physical well-being is at risk or our physical health is at risk, where we may not have a choice. But in general, in most cases, we often have some sort of choice. So low agencies, I don't have a choice. If we move a little bit higher on the spectrum, then we can say, an agency where I have kind of like a black and white choice. And that was the case for me when I decided to leave the startup. I said, I either stay or I go. So I would call that still, higher agency, but still, not the highest level of agency. And then really high agency is when instead of seeing the world in black and white, we see a rainbow of colors. So I could have said, in my case, I could have said, maybe I can stay here and redesign my job or, hire more people or change the way in which I interact with my work, set better boundaries, whatever that is. And if I left, I could have said, instead of starting a consulting company, which felt to me like the only choice I had at the time, I could have said, maybe I can rest, or maybe I ended up going back to school later as my agency increased. So I think it's important to look at it in that way.
I think among the most powerful things that I do with my coaching clients is to take them from that belief that they have no choice, which is often what they'll say to me, I have no choice about this, to recognize that they do have a choice. They just don't like the choice that's available. So it's a very black and white. And then to finally move them to the place that there are 5 or 6 choices they hadn't even looked at, some of which they may like, some of which they don't like. But the opening out of that possibility makes people feel better. It makes them feel like they're not a victim. It makes them feel like, again, they have some agency, to use your language for that. It's a very powerful move to recognize that, no, wait, there's several things here that could work.
Yeah, and it allows you to feel that sense of agency about how you navigate the world. And I think that's a really powerful, and as far as we know, uniquely human capacity, which makes us very, very special, right? This ability to take a problem, break it down, and see all the different angles, using our prefrontal cortex and engaging all of that intellectual power. That's a really unique and a gift that we have as a species. And sometimes we forget that we have access to it because we are in this survival mode state where we're just looking to put out the fires that are around us.
I get that. Let's go back. I guess can you give me an example of about having agency and what that actually feels like?
Sure. And I want to share the story of Adriana, my partner, because she's been a tremendous inspiration when it comes to agency for me. So in the summer of 2023, we were at a conference in Denver. We flew back to Toronto, and she said, I have double vision. We ended up at the emergency room, and a few days later, we found out she had MS. And MS is a progressive disease. It's a very challenging one. As a matter of fact, I'm donating royalties from the book to MS Research as a result of this whole experience. So in that moment, of course, it was heartbreaking, not only for Adriana, but for me and for the entire family. It was a major life change for us, having a progressive disease. And what Adriana decided to do, at the time she was studying social work, and she decided to focus her placements, her internship placements, working with families with critical illnesses. She made an agentic choice to use her very difficult experience to try and connect with people who were going through something similar to what she was going through. And not only did that give her an opportunity to gain some perspective around, how difficult what she was facing was in comparison to other people. We are animals of comparisons a lot of times, but it allowed her to use this, all the difficult emotions and all of the processing that she had to do in a community of people who were enduring something similar to what she was enduring. And her experience taught her and us as a family the importance of connection, which is why connection is one of those really, really powerful elements of thriving. And as she did that, now she's finishing her studies and she's going back to do that. But I was so inspired by it that I ended up joining a crisis intervention team and started working with families that are going through difficult challenges as well as a volunteer. So what I have found is that sometimes when we transcend ourselves, and there's a chapter in the book that talks about what transcendence is, how it is defined in the research and what it means and how it can impact us. When we think beyond ourselves, when we think about how we can connect to others in a way that's kind of selfless. I say kind of because it's not absolutely selfless, but it's more selfless than we usually navigate our days, And when we do that, the ripples of that are so tremendous, and they can have such a significant impact on the world that I think sometimes we underestimate how powerful we can be as agents of change.
I know from my own work, not in crisis, but working with people in corporations who feel like the system isn't fair, they've not been treated fairly, there aren't opportunities for them, etc. And getting them together with a group of people having the same experience and getting that community built, so the trust built, the stories shared, the kind of challenges shared, and they suddenly realize they're not alone. That moment when you realize it's not about me, it's a generic issue everybody's facing. It may be unique to our group, it may not be unique to a group, but I've got other people who see what I see and are experiencing what I see. The lift in confidence, the lift in agency, I can do something about this, and that's tied directly to confidence, is powerful. It's one of the main reasons I love bringing groups together for a training session, because you can build that sense of community if you design it right. And it's important, really, really important. I get that one. So back to the definition of agency. It means that I make intentional choices coupled with the belief that those choices will move me forward to a better state of affairs, even if it's just a tiny state of affairs. Sometimes it's a different state of affairs that allow me to have more choices too, I would just say, by the way. It's not always clear that it's better immediately. And the power of the community with that, the power of meaning behind that, and the power of agency. So let's take agency, and you talk about their 9 elements. I want to understand what these are.
Yeah. So one of the things that I understood. So Wanda, my mom is a behaviorist, staunch behaviorist psychologist. She studied with Joseph Wolpe, which is one of the pioneers of behaviorism. So when I grew up thinking, change your behavior, everything else follows. That was my belief. That's how I saw the world. That's how I interpreted what I learned. And as I got older, what I started realizing is, yes, behavior is incredibly important, but it's not the only element that matters, right? We have our thoughts, we have our emotions, we have sensations, and what I mean by sensations is how we experience our bodies. We have transcendence, which another word for it is spirituality. I prefer transcendence because in the literature, you see a lot more research around transcendence, and there's slight overlap. Anyway, let's not get into the nuance of it. But and then I noticed that it all sits on a timeline. Our past influences how we navigate the world and our beliefs. Being in the present moment is probably one of the most powerful gifts that we can give to ourselves and to those around us. And the future, prospection, this is one of my teachers, Marty Seligman. He wrote a whole book about prospection and how important prospection, hope, and optimism are. And then all of this occurs within a context. And you had just mentioned in your group work that sometimes people say, well, the system isn't fair. And I would say, you're right. The system is not fair. This is a system built for success. It's not a system built for thriving. So the fact that we are living in a system that's built for success and not for thriving makes it really hard to thrive. So we have to slowly figure out how do we influence the systems in which we experience life in order to shift them slightly more towards thriving. And by the way, I'm not arguing that success is bad. I want success just as much as the next person. What I'm suggesting here is that success and thriving are not mutually exclusive. And sometimes it may be worth sacrificing a little bit of success for a little bit more thriving. And sometimes it may be worth sacrificing a little bit of thriving for more success. But the key here is, can we make it a choice? Can it be agentic? Instead of just letting the system run me, can I actually figure out how I navigate? Yes, I'm navigating this boat in the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not going to change the Atlantic Ocean, but I can choose how I navigate within that ocean. And that can be a really powerful thing.
Just to say, I'm in choosing in this moment to let the system run me. Or I'm choosing in this moment to try to influence the system in a different way. Or I'm choosing in this moment to ignore the system, and I will live with consequences of that. Just to recognize that I have a choice in how I approach the system is also a pretty powerful thing. And that if I want to pick it up another day, I can pick it up another day. However, I work with it, I don't work with it. It's like that's a choice. All choices have consequences, but it's a choice, and sometimes a viable one.
And the practice and the skill of realizing that there's that choice, it's a practice. And the more you do it, the easier it gets.
That's, like I said, I think that's what I do. One of the core things I do in coaching is helping people see what those choices are because most people want to say, well, I only have 2 choices. I don't like that one, then I'm forced to take that one. No agency whatsoever. And they don't stop to think, to really process, to ask other people around them, to generate 10, 15 different choices that they could deploy. And when you do, suddenly you wait, I have more agency because I have more choices in front of me. It's an incredibly powerful thing. Okay, you said this a couple times. Agency exists on a spectrum. It can be low, it can be high. The more choices I see, the higher I'm going to feel my sense of agency. You said that it's a practice, that I can develop a better practice. Okay, how? Explain to me how.
Yeah, so as I dug deep into the research and started reading a lot about how do we become more agentic in the world, there were 3 things that kept coming up over and over again. And I synthesized them in an acronym, AIR, which stands for awareness, inquiry, and reframing. And the practice of air is a way to develop agency. I'm not going to say it's the only one, but it certainly worked for me. And there's research and evidence that suggests that these are ways in which we can engage our most agentic selves. So let's walk through air with a little bit of an example. So earlier this summer, my youngest son, broke his arm 3 days before going to summer camp. So while all his friends were jumping in the lake, Jacques was sitting on the sidelines. So one of the things that we did is we gave him a Rubik's Cube. And so he could play with it because he had a cast all the way up to his shoulder. So it was a nice way for him to exercise his hand. So I'm going to use this Rubik's Cube to try and explain what he feels like to gain some agency. When we are in a difficult situation or experiencing a difficult emotion or overthinking or in this state of survival mode, one of the things that happens is that it feels like the Rubik's Cube is right next to our face. It's right next to our eye. So we can't actually see the whole shape. We can't actually see all the sides. All we see is maybe one little square with a sticker. And a lot of times that sticker tends to be red, but that's all we see because it's so close to our face. What awareness does, it gives us the opportunity to get a little distance from the Rubik's Cube. So take it from right next to our face, call it to, 12, 15 inches away from our face. And the moment we do that through awareness, we can actually start, instead of being the subject of our experience, we can start to look at the experience we're having as an object that we can actually explore. So we start noticing and we say, interesting. So it's not just a sticker with the color red. It's actually a cube that has 6 sides, and each side has 9 different squares with different colors. So now we're learning a lot about the situation just thanks to awareness. Once we've achieved that awareness, we can move into inquiry, and we can start asking lots of questions. We can start asking lots of questions about the Rubik's Cube. So we can start playing with it and moving it in different shapes and trying to figure out what are the different combinations that you can make with a Rubik's Cube. Eventually, we find a combination that works for us. And that may be solving the Rubik's Cube, or it may be something completely different, but that's what reframing is. So in my personal life, I had a lot of... while I was writing the book, it was challenging, but I was very engaged, and I found a lot of flow states, and it was a way to test my ideas and work with editors and work with a team to try and bring it to life. Once I shifted into promotion, it was difficult. It's a different skill set, right? Like sitting here, Wanda, having this conversation with you, trying to promote a book. And the first few conversations I recorded were really, really difficult. And my first thought was, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to promote the book. That was my non-agentic initial reaction. Eventually, as I became aware of my reaction and started inquiring to them, I said, whose voice is this really in my head? What's making me be so pessimistic about engaging in these conversations? What's so hard about it for me? Eventually, the reframe was, for me, I'm going to take every single one of these conversations, number one, with a whole ton of gratitude. It's a gift, Wanda, that you're opening this space for me to talk to your listeners. So gratitude helped. Number two, I'm going to use it as practice. I may get it right. I may not get it. Some things I may miss. I may not, English is my second language. There are, sometimes I have to translate in my head. So it's a whole process. And I said, okay, so take it as practice. And the third reframe that was really important for me is, this is just two humans having a conversation. This is just two people trying to communicate and learn from each other. And that helped me get through that initial really difficult time and getting to a place where I'm actually really enjoying having these conversations with people like you, Wanda, and sharing these ideas out into the world.
I think there's so much written today in the business literature about reframing. And I think we turn that into a bigger thing in our mind. It's an important thing. I don't mean to undermine it, but I think we lose sight of the simple reframing. Like, This is not going to be this conversation is not going to make or break your book sales. I'd love to say it's going to make them, but I'm not sure it's going to have that kind of impact. But if you take any one podcast away from saying this is the one that will make me successful or make me a failure, and say each one of these podcasts is a practice for me to get better at giving the talk, better at being on stage, better at whatever, then that is a simple reframing that focuses on the goal that I'm trying to achieve at the end. And what I love about what you just said in that example is it's a very doable reframing. It's a different focus in the goal.
Yeah, and it requires a large degree of self-compassion, which is what a lot of us often struggle with. So at the center of the map in the book is beliefs. And the reason why they're at the center of the map is because they're often, the glasses with which we look at the world, right? So whatever the tint our beliefs have is how we're going to look at the world. And if my belief, well, first of all, in my coaching work, one of the beliefs that most often comes up is I'm not good enough. And that belief is usually, it has two sides. One side is I'm not good enough, and the other side is I need to prove myself in order to be good enough. And I realized as I was, doing this podcast interviews, I was like, oh my God, that belief is really active for me right now. So I had to offer myself compassion and say, hey, John, you're trying, you're doing your best, you're engaging in these conversations, you're learning, you're getting better every time. And some people might like it and some people may not. And that's okay. So one of my strong beliefs is that the ideas in this book are really important for people to learn, because there's 25 years of research that has kind of trickled into the mainstream media, but it hasn't actually made it into, it's in the zeitgeist, but it still hasn't actually landed for a lot of people. Like this idea of you're not your thoughts. For the longest time in my life, I identify with my thoughts as if they were truths, as if they were the reality, facts. And the moment I started slowly detaching myself from my thoughts, my goodness, did I find a tremendous amount of agency and thriving. So these are ideas, they're not new. Philosophers have been talking about it for thousands of years. And over the past 25 years, we've many really brilliant researchers have come up with research to actually show us that there's evidence to support these ideas. So if we can actually shift our beliefs just a little bit and saying, oh, wait, I'm not actually my thoughts. My thoughts are mental events. They're just a bunch of neurochemicals and signals happening in my brain. And I don't have to believe every thought. I don't have to attach myself to every thought. That is a powerful reframe. It's a powerful reframe.
I see breakthroughs. You can give me the most difficult coaching challenge with somebody whose behavior is causing the biggest problem whatsoever. If I can get them to be A, aware of their beliefs, B, to understand how those beliefs might be impacting their results or their world or the consequences, and then can get them to consider an alternative set of beliefs that might serve them well, man, we're home. Like the rest will fall out. If I can never get that, I can make a short-term change, not going to stick. And I'm totally with you.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that just naming it a belief, it means that we can change it. Because a lot of times people won't know that they're beliefs. No, this is a fact. If I leave my job in 2 weeks, I'm going to be living under a bridge. And listen, for a very long time, I experienced that. And to me, it was very real. I stayed up at night. I woke up in the middle of the night sweating and saying, oh my God, I'm going to get fired tomorrow. How am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to take care of my family? And this was a very real belief for me. The moment I walked away from that job, I realized, maybe that's not the case. Maybe there's about 100 steps between the moment I leave and the moment I'm living under a bridge, right? So I can find another job. I can, my wife can work too, we can do different things. We have friends. We have people that will support us. We can move to a different city, to a different house. So the moment I started seeing that survival mode reaction of not actually having a sense of agency was fooling me. It was lying to me. And the moment I started challenging that, a whole world opened up.
World.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's the heart and soul. I think you're right, John. These words, agency, resilience, reframing, are in the zeitgeist without any doubt. Completely. And you find CEOs will say, well, we just need better resilience. Or we need to run a training course on resilience, as if naming it would solve the problem. So once I've identified it, that does it. What we're missing is some practical, what does it look like and what can I do as a normal, ordinary human being that moves us forward? And it's part of what I like, what you've done so much with agency, because I think it's hugely powerful. We've talked a lot about meaning and purpose. I think agency is the secret sauce that gets us moving in the right direction. Okay, John, let me do one last question with you. So let me just kind of recap here for a minute. There's this notion that in survival mode, we often feel like we have no choice. The move to thriving is a sense of recognizing that there are many things we can do, that we have many options, and that there are multiple paths we could pursue. That shift is partly understanding our agency. It's partly understanding meaning, what matters to us, and it's partly recognizing the social connections that we have. You just identified all of those in your story about the panic of, I'm going to be living under a bridge, to wait, there are many other people, meaning, etc. Agency to me is the stepping stone without which nothing else is going to really work. So agency is a whole set of things, as you've rightly described, bunches of them, 9 of them. I won't repeat all 9 of them, but things like our emotions, our sensations. It's that choice, that the belief that I have a set of choices that I can choose, I can make intentional choices, and that those choices will move me forward to a different state of affairs. So to get that set of choices, I have to be aware of my thoughts, my emotions, my sensations, the voices in my head, how close I am to the problem, and get a little distance from the problem. And then I have to go out and inquire, what are the range of options that I can consider? What are, some of which I might not like, but what are the possibilities? And then I want to reframe what it is I'm trying to do next. What's the outcome I'm driving towards? And I think that's where meaning comes in. And I think connection supports you all the way through all of those, because I don't think you can get the awareness without somebody helping you. And I don't think you can inquire without somebody helping you. Okay. All of which gets us to the final thing to say, can you change your beliefs?
By the way, that was a beautiful summary, Wanda. Thank you so much. I think I'm gonna ask you to start doing the interviews for me. That my answer to can we change our beliefs is a resounding yes. We have changed our beliefs in history. As a matter of fact, for people who are strong believers in science, the scientific method, the whole point of the scientific method is to challenge beliefs and change them. 100 years ago or 80 years ago, we thought that smoking was good for your health, and doctors would recommend different cigarette brands, right? 50 years ago, we didn't know that seatbelts could save lives, right? So as we go through history, we found that changing our beliefs, listen, slavery was legal. It was believed to be the right thing. We get to challenge those things, and challenging our beliefs, I believe, is one of the most radical acts and most subversive acts that we can do as humans, especially when we find ourselves in a situation where we feel like our sense of agency has diminished. So, yes, we can change our beliefs. Yes, it requires self-compassion. It requires connection. It requires help. I think you made a really good point, Wanda, that usually these changes happen in connection to others, whether that's a friend, a coach, a parent, a cousin, whoever it is in your life that can help you work through the AIR steps, through the awareness, inquiry, and reframing. It's usually much more enjoyable and much more effective when we do it in connection. I know some folks like to journal a lot, and maybe that works for you. So one of the things about this book is that it's not really a book, it's a guide. And what I mean by it's a guide is that it was written in a way for people to actually pick and choose whatever it is that resonates with them. So I wanted people to have agency in reading the book. I didn't want you to buy it and say, I have to read it from cover to cover in order to understand what John is talking about. So the book presents a lot of questions that you can maybe journal on or that you can reflect on as you go for a walk. And the whole point is to start challenging those beliefs gently, because beliefs are the ones that got us here, right? One of the things that I think it's really important when I'm talking to my coaching clients is it's not just saying, oh my God, that belief is horrible. I can't believe I believed that for my entire life. It's more saying, hey, that belief got me here. If it wasn't for that belief, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have the family and the friends and the people around me that I do today, or the success that I have, or the thriving that I have. And that belief at some point may not be serving me as much as it used to. So am I willing to lean into my agency and let go of that belief ever so gently and let another belief take its place? It's a difficult, challenging process that requires a lot of grit and a lot of resilience.
Right. And is the secret place for getting to a stronger sense of agency. I'm going to do one last story from me. I was with a group yesterday and I was going through some things that I think are major barriers in career progression. And most of those turned out to be beliefs. This was, for the record, Muriel Wilkins' research that I was reviewing. I love that book, Leadership Unblocked. Like one of them is one of the beliefs is I have to be involved. If I'm not involved, it's going to go awry. That belief serves people incredibly well in the first half of career. It will get you promoted, success, minimal errors, recognition for execution capability. I mean, it will serve you very, very well. There's a moment at which you can't do any more if you continue to believe that you have to be involved. And hitting that moment and then recognizing I have this belief. It is a belief. It has made me successful, but it isn't going to keep me making successful or keep me thriving, either way you want to choose. And then intentionally shifting that. But geez, because it's been so helpful, and now it's not. Another one is I can't make a mistake. Yeah, it's great. It's fabulous. All right, John, I love this. A sense of agency. Agency is a practice. It's something that will move us from being a sense of surviving to a sense of thriving. It takes other things, not just agency. It takes meaning and connection. All of those, I think, help you find greater agency. I love your acronym about awareness, inquiry, and reframing. So, John, if somebody wanted to reach you, where could they find you?
Yeah, so my website is johnrosenberg.com, and I'm with an M, Rosenberg with an M. And I'm often on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. You can find me in either of those or Instagram, and please reach out if you have any questions, if anything that we talked about resonated with you. I'm always happy to hear people's opinions and ideas and hopefully ways to change my beliefs.
I love that one. Okay. John Rosenberg, Jon, by the way, Rosemberg, just to make sure everybody can find you easily. The book is A Guide to Thriving, the science behind breaking old patterns, reclaiming your agency, and finding meaning. John, love it. Great conversation. I wish you fabulous success. And I would say to all of our listeners, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. outofthecomfortzone.com. Or check out our new YouTube channel where you can watch this conversation, or you can watch a couple of short clips if you want the Reader's Digest version. And that's Out of the Comfort Pod. And then join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone.